Diesel locomotive design has changed a lot in the past 100 years, from boxy to streamlined to this thing, and onto today's more aerodynamic designs. One design prevalent from the late 40s all the way into the early 80s was something referred to as a high hood. What happened to the design, and why don't we see it on locomotives nowadays? Let's yap about it. Yes, the bills can be that high. The high hood locomotive design can be traced back to the late 40s with units like the Alco RS3 and the Baldwin RS12 with their hammerhead designs, but more so with the GM Electromotive GP7. Dissimilar to previous General Motors built units like the F3s, the E7s, and the NW2s, the new unit featured a hood over the engine that wasn't full width over the frame, but was as high as the cab roof. The design was cheaper to manufacture than GM's other offerings at the time like the F7 or the get this off my screen right now, and it was more practical for maintenance and more importantly a combo of road and switching use compared to the covered wagon F units. Back in the day, a lot of units were set up to run long hood forward, where the prime mover is ahead of the crew. This was done for the most part as a way to get crews that had been on the railway during the steam days to easily get used to running the newfangled diesel road switchers. Some crews even requested the engines to be run like that, because of the feeling of additional safety. With a steamer, the cab is at the rear of the locomotive behind the boiler. The boiler shielded crews from injuries and collisions. Unless said boiler exploded. Same sort of deal with long hood forward diesels. Well, minus the boiler explosions, but you get the idea. You ever notice a tiny letter F on the frames of locomotives? Locomotives set up to run long hood forward would have them on what we'd call the rear of the units nowadays to denote the front of the unit. Of course, not every road ran high hood units long hood forward. In some cases it was to get around an operating loophole so you didn't have to turn the units around at the end of a run apparently. More models from GM and even other manufacturers came in high hood options throughout the 50s and 60s like the EMD GP30, GEU 25B, MLW RS18, Fairbanks H1644, and Baldwin AS416s, just to name a few. The pros to the design was supposedly a bit of extra safety in the event of a collision, and room for extra amenities like a toilet or storage for crew's gear. But really, the cons outweighed them by a lot. Legendary railroader Rodney Kintorski put it best: "Let's put the hood up on your car and drive down the road, it's safe!" That perfectly sums it up. You could see out your windows, but there's a lot you're missing on the road. Hey, let's go! The light's green! Come on! The thing is with high hoods, the stupid hood's in the way of everything. Using the high hood GP38 as an example, the cab windows aren't massive. Like, sure, you could see out of them, but especially on curves that go in the opposite direction of the engineer's side, there's stuff that's in a massive blind spot. Of course, the conductor is there to look, but overall, the design created more problems than it solved, according to crews that worked in the glory days of high hoods. Eventually, locomotives came standard with low short-nosed designs that were meant to be run short hood forward, including units originally designed with the high hoods, like the GP9s or RS18s for example. Some earlier low-nose models had singular windows instead of the usual two small ones. Some even had what was referred to as an L window, where the glass on the engineer's side was uninterrupted, forming a sideways letter L. But what about units built with high hoods? Well, as far back as the early 70s, railways began experimenting with chop-nose overhauls of units like the GP9s for example. I'm not exactly sure who started the trend of chopping the high hoods, could have been anyone really, but I do know that in 1970 and 71, Canadian Pacific chopped the noses of 3 GP9s to help aid crew visibility when switching Alyth Yard in Calgary, Alberta. This was around a decade before their 10-year locomotive plan was introduced, that saw the overhauls of the rest of their GP7, GP9, and RS18 fleet with new chopped noses and the letter U at the end of the model name. Even CP's sole RSD-17, number 8921, got the chopped nose treatment in the 80s. Now it's essentially an RS-18U on steroids. Canadian National is well known for their GP9RM fleet, a good few of which are still in service to this day on CN, as well as various short-line railways across Canada and the United States. Starting in the early 80s, CN's Point St. Charles shop saw over 100 GP9 locomotives, giving them new low-nose cabs, new electronics and mechanical components, and being reset to run short hood forward. American counterpart Grand Trunk Western, the Gronka, also rebuilt a majority of their GP9 fleet into GP9Rs, with modern EMD standard cabs found on units like the GP35. Illinois Central, or the Illinois Central Gulf back in the late 70s, rebuilt tons of first and second hand GP7, GP9, and GP18 models into GP8s, GP10s, and GP11s at their shops in Paducah, Kentucky. The Family Line system even contracted them to rebuild a handful of former Louisville and Nashville GP7s into GP16s. The Seaboard Coastline was happy with the rebuilt Jeeps and continued the rebuild program with over 150 GP7, 9, and 18 models at their own Waycross, Ucetta, and Jacksonville shops to keep it in the family. And there goes my audience from the south. My bad, guys. The high hood option for locomotives seemed to have faded away in the very early 80s, with none other than the Southern ordering high hood GP50s in 1981 and B30-7s as late as 1982. In short, the Southern was the king of high hood locomotives, sticking with the design until the very end. The trend of running long hood forward stuck around well into the Norfolk Southern merger, with some Dash 8s being set up to run backwards, even with the short hood you could see infinitely better out of. Hey, if it runs, that's really all that matters when you're serving the South. By the early 90s, the only units built even so little as resembling high hoods were the 23 cabless GP60B units built for the Santa Fe, many of which are in service today with BNSF. In conclusion, high hoods, while for the most part impractical, have a certain charm to them. The term function over form couldn't ring more true with locomotives, as long as the stupid thing can run and get the job done, and has a microwave if you're CN. It doesn't matter if it looks visually appealing, or like that one ADM GP9 they chopped all the nose off of. Why did they do them so dirty, bro? As for high hoods, seeing one on Norfolk Southern, Class 3 short lines, or tourist railways and museums today is always a nice change of pace from today's standard, the North American safety cab. But mainly, they're yet another look into how much the railroad industry has evolved to what we know and love today. Hey everyone, this is the Winnipeg Bus Fan. Yeah, that's right, I'm done with trains. Just kidding. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Feel free to subscribe. Shout out to the channel members for the extra support. Feel free to join the channel for early access to new videos and a mention at the end of said video. As always, you know the rules. Be nice in the comments. Don't diddle kids. Don't derail trains for clout. See you next Tuesday. Woo!